off. Welcome everybody. My name is Jack. I'm the Executive Director at One for the World, and I'm going to tell you more about what we do in just a second. I'm delighted to be joined today by Caroline Teti, who is the Director of Recipient Advocacy at GiveDirectly, one of the most effective charities in the world and a One for the World recommended charity. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jack.
Pleasure to have you. A couple of bits of housekeeping before we kick off. So we are recording the webinar today. If anybody isn't comfortable with that, then please just let us know before you dial off and we'll make sure you get the recording of it subsequently. We're also going to be running a Q&A throughout, and you will notice that the chat function is not enabled, but if you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, there is a question and answer icon, and if you hit that, my colleagues Kenan and Evan and Ardi are going to be monitoring that and feeding me questions as we go along. So I'd much rather ask your questions than mine, so please do make sure that you're contributing fully to that, although we do also have a long list of questions that we'd like to ask Caroline. Before I introduce Caroline properly, I would like to introduce One for the World to you. Some of you may know who we are, but we are an organisation who encourage people to give 1% of their income to end extreme poverty. And we do that through using the world's most effective charities, GiveDirectly being one of those. You will be familiar with several of the others: Against Malaria Foundation, the Schistosomatitis Control Initiative, all organisations who are able to produce a staggering amount of change at a tiny cost. And unfortunately, the cost of poverty is very real. And the World Bank was saying just a couple of weeks ago, this will be the first year in some time, I think 2 decades, when more people enter poverty than leave poverty because of the terrible economic effects of coronavirus. So the problem is only growing. And right now, around 15,000 children a day who are under 5 die from preventable poverty-related causes. So a terrible problem, which is only going to get worse in the coming months as health systems that are not particularly robust and economies that are not particularly robust are affected by the things that are already affecting the developed world with terrible consequences. Now, you may look at that problem and think, well, what could I possibly do? And that's where One for the World is giving you an amazing opportunity, because we work with GiveWell, the world's leading charity evaluator, to identify organizations who, for very small amounts of money, the sort of amounts of money that you can afford on your salary, just 1% of your salary, if you give those small amounts of money to these organizations, they can achieve a long-lasting insecticide-treated bed net for under $10 to a pregnant woman or a child in a malarial area of Africa. They can put money, as GiveDirectly does, directly into the hands of refugees and other people living in extreme poverty so that they can do whatever change they feel is necessary in their life, whether that's feeding their family or buying healthcare or getting a motorbike so that they can travel further to work, or mechanizing their agriculture. And Caroline will tell us more about that in due course. So with this enormous problem of grinding poverty, actually there is an opportunity for you to do something about that. And the main reason we're here today is to hear from Caroline, but if you would consider taking the One for the World pledge, we would be delighted to have you join our movement. If you are interested in doing that, you're going to get a follow-up email from us. Please do schedule a chat with one of us. And if you're one of the many students who have been tuning into these webinars and you're interested in supporting us, you can start a chapter at your school or university where you can persuade your peers to take the pledge. And again, it's not often that you have the opportunity to raise over $100,000 in pledges to the world's most cost-effective charities, but this is one of those opportunities. So if you're interested in either of those, do please follow up with us after the webinar. Now, to introduce my guest, I'm delighted that Caroline Teti, the Director of Recipient Advocacy at GiveDirectly, is joining us. I'm particularly grateful, as she was just telling us, that she is exceptionally busy with GiveDirectly's programs, both the ones that were going to be going on and the ones that are a response to coronavirus. Caroline's had an incredibly interesting career. She started off in sanitation and health at water.org before moving to Deutsche Stiftung Weltbevölkerung. I trust that pronunciation will pass, working in Kenya as an advocacy manager, and then gained extensive frontline field experience with Evidence Action in their deworming program, which is also one of the most effective interventions in the world and a One for the World top charity, before moving into a field role with GiveDirectly and now moving into her current role as a Director of Recipient Advocacy. We're very grateful to her for joining us from Kenya this evening, and particularly delighted to have a representative from the very front line of the work of the charities that we support, because all too often we only hear from people who work in HQ. So Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jack. My pleasure also to join and to contribute to this line of conversations.
Wonderful. So I think just as a starting ground, it would be really good if you could explain what it is that GiveDirectly does, in case anybody who's on the call is not familiar with your model.
So at GiveDirectly, number one, our vision is to influence the aid industry using cash as a benchmark for reduction of poverty. So GiveDirectly was formed as a nonprofit, started its work here in Kenya, but has now expanded to 7 countries, expecting an 8th country in Africa. We have also tried our work in the US for disaster response during the hurricane, and worked in disaster areas in countries such as Bahamas. Our work mainly is to identify people affected by living in extreme poverty and deliver cash through mobile money. We deliver this money, through a targeting process that helps us to identify these people within their communities, and we saturate those communities, which basically means when we identify small communities of poor people, that community then qualifies as a whole to be enrolled into the GiveDirectly program. Our foundation programs are basically lump sum transfers, which send $1,000 per household. But we also have recently expanded into special programs. For example, the Basic Income Project that is sending $22 per person, per adult, per month for 12 years. We have disaster response programs like the one we did in Bahamas, in Puerto Rico, in Houston in the US. We have refugee response programs in Uganda and Rwanda. And recently we also launched programs that help us to compare cash with traditional aid or traditional interventions to help us learn and provide more knowledge. Just for us to know, GiveDirectly also invests a lot in conducting evidence-based research to conduct scientific researches that are mainly randomized control trials to help generate more evidence for people who want to know more about cash and how it works, to help them also, develop a sense of understanding and go into this knowing what they're walking into.
Yes, and it's really important to pick up there what Caroline was saying about measurement, because I think the idea of just giving cash to people, although it's starting to gain more traction right now, a lot of people think it's counterintuitive, but GiveDirectly is probably one of, if not the most rigorously measured charity in the world. So could you talk a little bit more about how you try to demonstrate the actual effects of giving people cash as opposed to other types of intervention or no intervention at all?
Jack, to say the truth, I have been in this sector for over 15 years now, working in different organizations like you have mentioned, and I have seen how people do advocacy or lobbying for specific interventions that they do. At GiveDirectly, we do it in a different way. We provide the evidence through research so that when you speak about cash, you speak about cash in ways that have been tested and you can prove that it actually works. We also deliver cash to people. And by delivering cash to people, we actually create impact where that money is supposed to be creating impact. And therefore, the next other thing that we do to show that cash works is there are people who want to see real time what happens when you give people cash. So we give them an opportunity to be able to come down to these countries where we are doing our work and see for themselves, speak to these recipients, ask them questions about where they were before the cash and what the cash has done for them. So those two have been the greatest pillars for our stories. And that is especially why even right now, as people go through the COVID difficulties, we want to use this opportunity to be able to also demonstrate that even when the world goes through difficult times such as COVID, cash still remains an effective, efficient, easy to deliver response for people living in extreme poverty.
Yes, and this is something that runs through a lot of One for the World's registered recommended charities, but you're always trying to compare a group that you're giving cash to a very similar group that isn't, to try and create that contrast. Is that right? I think that's my understanding of your measurement process.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly speaking to the scientific researches that we run, and those are randomized control trials. And that basically means that we identify communities that we want to test these models in. And in those communities, we randomly assign people or communities into different groups. One of the groups is called the treatment group, which is basically the group that we give cash, and another group is a control group. So the control group is almost like a confirmatory group that helps us to confirm the impact of the groups that we have given the cash. We have done quite a number of these studies to test different things, including does the cash increase, wastage and, spending on alcohol and cigarettes? Does cash increase inflation in communities where this money has been given? Does cash increase domestic violence? And many, many other questions, including, studies that help us to ask questions about, while GiveDirectly does unconditional cash, what happens when you nudge people in a small way to behave in a certain way? Does that influence how they make the decisions on how to spend the money that you've given them? So we try to test different ways in which cash can be delivered to communities and the impact it can create.
Fantastic. And can you give us an idea of what exactly your role is as a Director of Recipient Advocacy? I must admit, it's actually not a job title I've come across before, so it would be great if we could hear about your role and maybe your average day.
I'm Director of Recipients Advocacy at GiveDirectly. It's a unique title, like you say, even within GiveDirectly, as it were, but it's a title that has grown because of the experience that we've had as an organization. And as it suggests, Director of Recipients Advocacy, I stand within GiveDirectly to stand in the gap for our recipients, both from a GiveDirectly perspective and from external perspective, which basically means that my role is to ensure that we are safeguarding our recipients, that they're having the best experience, that they are represented well. This is an example of recipients advocacy. I wouldn't be able to bring 10,000 people here to speak to you, Jack, and tell you the story of what we do. And even if I brought them, very few of them would be able to speak English in ways that you can hear. Others cannot speak English at all. So basically, also trying to create a mouthpiece that can be able to speak on behalf of the recipients, their experiences, their aspirations, share this with the world, with our donors, with the media, but also making sure that at GiveDirectly, we are very conscious about the experiences of these recipients. They should never come out feeling, harassed, disenfranchised, treated in a way that makes them feel less human, or that their transfers are affected in any way, either through fraud or whatever it is that can affect their transfers. So that's what Director of Recipient Advocacy is. What's my day like? So I wake up in the morning and I think about what all the countries of GiveDirectly's operations are thinking about. So I think with our country directors, to be able to catch up with them and monitor risks. So basically, I would say I'm a risk assessor, risk monitor when it comes to protecting recipients. So whether you're making a decision about which partner are we going to work with, which money are we going to accept, which recipients will we enroll, when will we enroll them, how much are we giving them, I try to look at each of those categories and ask the country teams, how much do you think this is in the interest of the recipient? Do you think that this is going to protect them by the same value that we set this program for? So that's what my day looks like. And it goes all the way to assessing what's happening in the community, what's happening in the media. Do the media ask our recipients the right questions? Do they feel violated? Are we getting consents from them? Do they get the space to be able to speak when they want to speak to GiveDirectly?
And so can you give us an idea of what the concerns you're hearing about from the recipients of GiveDirectly are? I mean, that may be too broad a question, but it would be really interesting to hear the things that are commonly being said to you in your day-to-day work at the moment.
So it varies quite a lot, and it varies from recipients wanting to be helped to be able to enroll into the program. So like that's the most basic level when we create contact with them. So we try to create spaces where recipients can feel confident to reach out to us and ask questions confidently and with courage and be able to be helped, that there's somebody who can hold their hands. It goes all the way to when we have already enrolled them, that a recipient may want to say, you know what, when I was enrolling, I didn't understand what this was all about, but now I feel like I want to get out of the program. Please help me. So we should have someone in hand to help them explain why this is still good for them, but also give them the space to say, you know what, this is your decision. If you feel like you want to be out of the program, even with all the explanation, we want to give you the confidence to feel and own the decision. And even when they have received the money, we still have to monitor their experiences and call them and ask them, did you have anything, any experience that you think may have been unbecoming? We monitor safeguarding risks. We monitor fraud risks. We monitor how recipients relate with other recipients and try to ask them, have you had a foul relationship either at the household or with other community members? That way we are able to know whether our money is helping people or is creating more adverse events in the communities.
And obviously it takes a lot of trust for them to give you this type of feedback, and actually just in general to accept a cash transfer within their community. So can you talk about how you go about building trust with local communities, both to deliver your programs and to get their feedback subsequently?
Very true. Jack, when you sit in the other end of the world, you may make some assumptions that sometimes when you come to the ground, you may not believe it. So for example, you might imagine that because people are living in extreme poverty, they will just sit there, and when you come with your money, they will accept it and say, thank you very much, we love money, bring it to us. They will ask you questions. And if they don't understand what this money is for, where it's coming from, they will not trust you and they will not accept it. And that's part of the reason that we take our recipients very, very seriously. When we get into the community, the first thing that we do is trust building, which is created through community meetings, through conversations with our recipients. Even right now during COVID, when we have to enroll people remotely, we have to make sure that the contact that we first make with the recipients build the trust, and we give them the option to opt out if they don't feel like this is someone they trust enough. We also give them time post that connection to be able to ask us questions before we can enroll them. The next thing that we do to build trust with the communities is use language that is familiar to them. Use funds delivery platforms that they're used to in their countries, the mobile money platforms. So we don't come in with structures that they don't understand. Then we also connect with them at a very personal level. Our enrollment is on one-on-one. It's almost like the hub and spoke last mile kind of contact. We talk to them at a personal level, give them the opportunity to speak to us, and be very patient with them. When you get to speaking to recipients about their experiences, some of them would go to the extent of sharing with you their personal lives, and being able to give them time to open up and speak to you is one way of letting them also trust. We also give them the opportunity to mistrust us. Like we tell them, yes, we know there are people who do not trust us, and we want you to speak to us when you feel you don't trust us, and we will be able to speak back to you and tell you why we think you should trust us.
It's interesting because GiveDirectly is such a strong kind of rational model, and a lot of the evidence for you relies on quite a data-driven mindset from supporters of what you do. But actually you're sort of the human side of that equation, right? Because just having a load of RCTs in your pocket isn't going to convince someone in a village to actually accept this money and that your intentions are good. So you're almost a counterbalance to that kind of ruthlessly data-driven side of GiveDirectly.
Exactly. Yeah, we are highly technology-driven, highly data-driven, but that's mainly for our external connection and being able to internally manage the processes. But when it comes to the actual work, this is about humanity, it's about care, it's about empathy and connecting with humans at the points that matter most.
And with the things that you hear from your recipients, how are you then able to feed those into decision making or program design, further up the GiveDirectly chain? So you're hearing from people on the ground and your colleagues are. How do you take those views and make sure something actionable comes on the back of those?
I'd like to bring it back to my days before GiveDirectly and just call up the work that I was doing at Deworm the World. And during that life, we dewormed like 6 million children every year against neglected tropical diseases. And every day we kept talking about neglected tropical diseases as diseases of the poor. They are neglected, they have hard names, leishmaniasis, lymphatic filariasis, onchocerciasis. It's not the names that you talk about every day on the streets. And when you think about it, it's not actually about neglected tropical diseases. It is diseases of the neglected people, the poor people who are not reached by interventions that can change their lives. So when I come to GiveDirectly and find an intervention that actually touches people's lives directly, I'd love to hear so much about how this intervention moves people from being neglected to being included. And every time you speak to recipients, they will tell you, we have had a lot of interventions. We have worked with a lot of NGOs, but this, for the first time, we have seen the money that donors give. We always just heard that donors give millions of shillings, millions of dollars, but GiveDirectly has given us an opportunity to see those dollars, touch those dollars firsthand. That's one. The second thing recipients will tell you is, we have an opportunity like never before to own a program that we are given money and given the opportunity to make the decisions on our own. Nobody's coming here to tell me, take your child to school, go and buy food, build yourself a house, start a business. No one is forcing me. So when I make the decision, I own the decision. It's giving me a choice. And when I have decided to spend my money in whatever way I've decided to spend it, I feel empowered. I feel like I'm a new person. I feel like I've been put on the table of decision making. And now I can actually be part of the change that we are always speaking about. So that is at a high level. Micro level, when people speak about their personal experiences, cash has given people an opportunity to respond to almost everything that I've heard about in all the development sectors that I have either interacted with or I have worked in. Cash has given people an opportunity to respond to health needs. We have women who've lived with barrenness for years, and when they receive cash for the first time, they got their first baby. No development intervention would single out that woman and identify her frustration and address that frustration. Women have been able to pick cash, build a house, and lots of them have built houses. But when you ask them, why did you build a house? Each person has a very unique explanation for why that house means a lot to them. And I will tell you 3 examples. One woman tells me, Caroline, for me, building a house is an opportunity for me to find a place where I can bath, a place that I own. For six consecutive baths, I've been borrowing a place to bath my babies. For another one, it's about the security of her daughters. That for the first time, my children don't have to walk in the dark going to look for a place to sleep. Now they're sleeping next to me. For another woman, it's an opportunity to be independent again. I have been married for 30 years. I've been sharing a house with my co-wives. And for the first time, I feel like I'm going to get an opportunity to make independent decisions because I am living in my own house and feeling free for the first time. And there are many people doing businesses, people buying solar lamps, and all sorts of things.
This leads neatly into a question, both one that was submitted in advance and also the first question in the Q&A. And I would encourage everybody who's watching to please use the question and answer to submit your own questions for Caroline. So our question was, how does your background in gender and human rights influence and inform your current work? And also Bara has asked, how do you look at the risk that cash transfers might support local structures that may be negative to some disempowered groups? So you've just talked about gender issues, but also there are other, cultural issues that you may be reinforcing. So that's quite a broad question, but we'll split it in half.
So I'll take the first one. So how does my training in gender and human rights help me in my current role? So like I said, I stand here to stay in the gap on behalf of our recipients. So basically, people who may not have a voice to speak on their own, I then create that platform to speak on their behalf. That the challenges, the stories that I've just shared is an example of, things that people don't think about oftentimes. in decision-making tables. And my training, therefore, has prepared me to be at the front line for rights advocacy for people who are disenfranchised. People living in extreme poverty are people who are in normal circumstances, disenfranchised. They don't have a voice. They don't sit on the table of decision making. Nobody thinks about them. They are literally neglected. So my training is giving me an opportunity to identify the challenges that they're facing and speak to those challenges around those decision making tables and people who are supposed to be listening to them. Do we think that introducing cash may be reinforcing prejudices or more disempowering? What we do with our cash is, like I said, we use national level data. So we come to a country and there'll be a structure in which the pyramid, the economic pyramid has been drawn. And there'll be people at the bottom of the pyramid and people at the top of the pyramid. Our vision is to reach the people at the bottom of the pyramid. Those people at the bottom of the pyramid, lots of times are clustered in same areas. So you will identify regions and you'll find poverty concentrated in some specific areas. We identify those areas and identify those communities. Once a community is identified, they're all treated the same way, all households. That way we create a level playing ground where people receive the same treatment and they're given the decision, the authority to make decisions on their own account. What that means, therefore, is if you decide to build a house, that becomes your decision. And you make that decision based on your cultural experiences, based on your challenges, based on what you think will change your position from a disempowered person to a more empowered person. So basically, we don't make the decision. We give people the opportunity to make the decision. And those decisions vary. They can, vary from anything. And money can do a lot of things for that matter.
Yes, and one of the things I've always loved about GiveDirectly is how firmly empowerment is at the heart of what you do, and giving people who don't traditionally have any agency the opportunity to try and take ownership. And I think it's, unpicking the sort of structural disadvantage in communities is hard anywhere in the world, but it seems like a good start to give the people who are most disadvantaged some ability to make decisions themselves and to see benefits from that.
Exactly.
And actually, that is another question I wanted to ask, which I think I know what you're going to say to this, but do you think that recipients' voices are heard enough in international development right now across the sector?
Cash is relatively, it's not new, but the aid sector has not embraced cash the way it would have embraced it. When the aid sector embraces an intervention, they invest in it. And when they invest in it, they don't just invest in its implementation, but they also invest in creating the voices that spur it even higher. To that extent, I do not think that we haven't yet had enough of people being listened to across the globe, especially in international development. We've not had the space for recipients to be able to speak or be spoken for, just because the prioritization has not reached the level where, we can push the lobbying and advocacy for cash to the level that it's supposed to be. At GiveDirectly, I may say that we have been trying. We try to create a voice for these recipients. One, by creating a platform on our website where they can tell their story so the world can be able to see what they were before and after. We try to give donors opportunities to come down and speak to recipients so they can hear firsthand what happens when you give people cash. We try to put stories out there in the media so that the public can hear about what cash does when people receive it, how life-changing cash can be. We also try to be part of engagements such as this that you have organized, Jack, so that we can be able to give expert opinion about what we have done, how this model has traveled, and where we think it can travel even further. What I think is we should be able to do more. We need people working in the development sector, investing in giving people an opportunity to tell their story about how cash has changed their lives, because that in itself is going to change the paradigm among development actors.
I've got a really good question here just relating to this idea of bringing these voices more prominently into the sector. Chloe's asked, you talked about mistrust from recipients. Do you know where that mistrust is born, and also how do you tackle that when you hear about that lack of trust?
Multiple things. Trust, like you say, humans will always trust what they know. The moment something strange is introduced in your life, you don't just fall for it hook, line, and sinker. You have to reflect. The more you get more information about it, the more it becomes familiar to you, the more you trust it. Exactly that is what happens with cash. A lot of times, cash has been used in disaster situations and in humanitarian settings. And even there, it has not been the main model of delivery. In models such as GiveDirectly, where we are going to communities where people are just living in extreme poverty, it's not disaster. People are just living in extreme poverty. No one has ever thought about it. In fact, in most of the communities where we've been working, people were receiving this intervention for the first time. They're hearing it for the first time. And you can imagine a community that has lived in poverty for so many years, and then someone comes and says, I'm going to give you $1,000. By the way, $1,000 in Kenya is 100,000 Kenya shillings. Average income in this country, in those villages that we work in, $2. You're talking about $2. So you're coming in and saying, I'm going to give you $1,000. So first of all, they're like, am I dreaming? Can I remove all the cobwebs off my face? Am I seeing right? And then they're like, but all these years I've lived, no one has ever thought about giving me $1,000. Where are you coming from? You must be the son of Illuminati. This must be devil's money. Or maybe you're coming to give me a loan and you're coming to come back and ask me to pay the loan. I don't have the capability. It's very natural. It's very, very natural for people to react that way. And as we continue to deliver the cash in these communities, people start becoming their own advocates, and they start speaking to each other and convincing each other, by the way I received it, this is what it did for me. And then we don't have to invest a lot in the information sharing and education.
How much do you think of the trust that your recipients have in GiveDirectly is actually trust in you personally and your colleagues?
You won't believe it. The moment you speak to a recipient and they get to trust you, believe you me, they will call you. It doesn't matter what time it is. They will call you to ask the most mundane question. Caroline, I got this SMS from GiveDirectly. Should I take 2 hours before I respond to it? You're like, duh, just respond to it, you know. So that level of trust, when recipients trust you, they almost believe you're the answer to everything. And when you get to that level, then you have to be ready for an inflow of information, an inflow of calls. What we have done at GiveDirectly is for us to be able to manage that, because it can also be overburdening to our staff. What we have tried to do is give them a toll-free line. You don't have to pay to call us, but you will always find an agent there to talk to you. People call, and when they call for simple things like, I just wanted to say thank you to GiveDirectly. Or close your eyes now, we pray. We want to pray because this money has really changed my life. Or I wanted to call you because my neighbor came and he wants also to be enrolled in the program. Can you please enroll him? So that level of trust, you know, that's the level of engagement that you get when people build trust with you. And I can tell you, one example is, just in this meeting, I have just seen that there is a very big supporter of GiveDirectly, is called Seth Awar, is always following what we're doing. That is what trust does. Trust makes people attached to you. You get supporters, cheerleaders, they're always behind you and working with you and walking with you. Thank you so much, Seth, for joining.
Yeah, fantastic. A real pleasure to have you with us, Seth, as well. Another question from the audience, from Sam. She asked, what have been the long-term benefits that you've seen in the communities where GiveDirectly works?
There is a community that we worked in 10 years ago, actually now 11 years. Anyone who knows that community and knows GiveDirectly cannot stop talking about the change that the money we sent to that community did. And they said, for years, this is a community where people lived in grass-thatched houses. You may not have an idea what it means to live in a grass-thatched houses, but when you live in a grass-thatched houses, literally half the year, you're being rained on. There's no roof over your head. Grass just leaks over you. And when people got money, lots of people built houses. And that transformation has never left the thoughts of many people. And they say, I wish I was in that community so that we could have lasting houses. We have people who have, received these transfers and their lives have changed in ways that even us at GiveDirectly did not imagine. This is a country where children go to school and leave high school with debts. And they come out and come back to their villages without certificates, meaning they're stuck until the day they will either work for someone, do casual labor, raise money, thousands of shillings to go and, get their certificates from school. We've seen young people take this money, go back to school, bring their certificates and enroll in colleges. That is something that I can't speak to. Like the sustainability of that impact is not something you can speak to. We have seen people who are disabled, dependent absolutely on their households to be able to do everything, including going to the toilet. And they got this money and bought wheelchairs and got part of it and started small businesses. So we just made this person mobile. And in addition, we've been able to give them an opportunity to start a livelihood. So they have a source of income and they can move, they're independent, which means they have freed the productive time of other people to go and work. A lot of times people ask, or people expect that when you give people cash, people should start businesses. And I tell people, let's get out of this thinking that when people get money, it is only effective when it produces more money. That's not true. Sometimes stability in itself is sustainability.
Just moving on to another question from the audience, from Bara, who's wondering about the impact on non-participants. So you have these amazing effects in the communities where you're working, but obviously a part of your measurement of your impact is to have other communities nearby who are not receiving the intervention, which has some ethical challenges associated with it. So what have you seen happen in those communities who are not part of the program? Do you see any conflict there? Is there any there issues with GiveDirectly engaging with those communities down the line? It'd be great if you could speak about that a bit.
This is a question that a lot of people ask. And most would ask you something as simple as, doesn't it cause jealousy? Don't people feel jealous of each other? Last year, we released a study called General Equilibrium. And General Equilibrium is a study that was conducted here in Kenya, and it was checking exactly that. What happens in economies where we have given money? What happens to communities where we've given money? What about the neighboring communities? What about the traders? Do we increase inflation? Do we cause more suffering to the people who are living next to them? What we actually found is that the money that we give to our recipients help the people who live next to them in ways that, significant ways, statistically significant ways. And we saw that, businesses grew, people live better, livelihoods improved. Because when you come to the communities where we're giving money, people will become innovative about how they want to change their lives. And I will give you an example. You give me money and I want to build a house. I don't build a house myself. I will call my neighbor to come and build me a house because he is a mason. What that means is I've created income for that mason. I will buy domestic animals, bring to my compound. I will not be able to look after those domestic animals because I have to do other things. So I bring a young man and ask him, hey, could you be my worker and be the one to tend my domestic animals? That is job right there, created for someone who previously was languishing with no income. So we see benefits to to communities beyond the people who receive this money. And I can tell you, in communities such as the ones that we are living in Kenya, coming from here, if there were negative impacts, today GiveDirectly would not be where we are, because there would be an uproar, even with government. Communities would be complaining and telling government, we're sorry, we don't think this intervention is the best for us. It's causing trouble to our communities. And beyond those communities, one other thing that we've seen is government officials, local governance, also improving. Government officials reporting that, we have been presiding over lots of cases, conflicts, land issues and all these things. We don't have those anymore because people have income. They have created income out of the money that you gave them. They've become more productive. They don't bother us anymore. So, we should never limit our capabilities with the thought that, if I give just a few people, then there'll be so many people will remain suffering. Don't limit yourself with the little that you can do. You can go so far just by giving one person money.
Fantastic. And just speaking to that kind of sustained impact that GiveDirectly has had, Chloe's asked, what advice would you give to other charities, especially grassroots and local charities, to try and improve their operating models and hopefully ultimately get the kind of amazing recognition that GiveDirectly has now from GiveWell and also from the wider public?
Jack, do you want to just get that question again? Sorry about that.
Yeah, so Chloe's asked, what advice would you give to other charities, especially grassroots and local charities, to improve their operating models and ideally get the kind of recognition that GiveDirectly has had from GiveWell and from others?
First, I would like to say that other charities doing whatever they're doing, we don't want to say that they are doing bad things, because they've also been able to change people's lives in whatever ways that people's lives have changed. And therefore, we don't want to say that giving cash and adopting the model of GiveDirectly is the only best thing that you can do for the communities that you're serving. What I would like to tell those charities, when you have designed your program, ask yourself, if I took this money and used it to implement the model that I have proposed, and if I took the same money and just gave it to people directly, would I have better impact with my model or would I have better impact with cash? If your model does better than cash, carry on and do it. But if cash does better than your model, please think about the people that you're serving and just give them the money. It is so much, all of us are working towards being able to deliver the best outcomes for people living in poverty. And if that best outcome comes from your model, please go ahead and do it. If it's coming out of cash, rethink your model, and maybe you should be adopting cash. And GiveDirectly, being the technical person that we are, always available to speak to people who want to start thinking cash.
And it's worth saying this very much models GiveWell's thinking. So GiveWell always say that GiveDirectly is the benchmark that they judge other charities by, because if your intervention is less effective than just giving money to people, then you arguably shouldn't do it. And I would like to take this moment, Caroline's far too professional to say that many charities do bad work, but they do. That's what One for the World exists to point out. Most of them are not as cost effective as the charities that One for the World recommends. And for any of you who are thinking about what can you do during coronavirus, there are two campaigns that I'd like to highlight from our recommended charities. One is GiveDirectly's coronavirus response, which is operating both in the United States and also in Africa, where we know that the coronavirus is about to have a terrible impact. And you can find out more about that on their website, but it's a fantastic opportunity to see cash move to people who desperately need it right now. And particularly if you were lucky enough to receive your own universal basic income from the US government recently and feel that you can do without that money, please consider passing it on to their campaign. They'll make sure that for a vanishingly small overhead, it goes to a family that need it. And the other campaign that I would like to highlight is Development Media International, who've received a GiveWell emergency grant around coronavirus, because they're perfectly set up to deliver the kind of health messages that we've all benefited from about all these terms we didn't even know about: social distancing and flattening the curve. And I learned how to actually wash my hands after 30 years of apparently doing it pretty badly. So there are all these things that people need to understand, and Development Media International need to raise $2 million to help as many people as possible in the developing world hear those messages. So we admire all charitable work, but we admire the work of our recommended charities much more than the average charitable program. And so if you are in a position to support those two, please consider doing that. And you can do that on our website. The link is in the chat. Another question from the audience, from Zoe, who says, I've seen studies about how interventions targeting women could potentially be more effective as women experience higher rates of poverty and their spending will typically align closer to health needs. Do you think GiveDirectly could potentially be more effective at alleviating poverty through these sorts of measures? And actually, to stick my own oar in, I think I've seen research that if you give unconditional cash transfers to women, you get better outcomes than if you give it to men. But I may have made that up. So over to you.
So some of these, a lot of people say that if you give women cash, you get better outcomes than if you give men. We've done studies here in Kenya, and unfortunately, it doesn't show that big of a deviation. However, that said, it doesn't yet change the calculus of women being the most disenfranchised. And if women and men can do better with cash and improve their lives, then it might make sense that the most disenfranchised should be targeted. Do we at GiveDirectly then select to make women our recipients or prioritize women over men? No, we don't. We give equal opportunities, and when we get into households, especially where we have couples, we give them an equal opportunity to decide in their houses who of the two of them decides who receives the money. Even when we have done that, our data shows that majority of our recipients are women. So right now, over 65% of our recipients are actually women. In a very unique community that we went to, we launched our programs in 2018, at the end of 2018. We were shocked to hear the community leaders there say that they would love that GiveDirectly gives the money to the women and not the men. But when we went to the community again, we actually found that men were absentees. They were not home. And we realized that's the reason these guys wanted us to give more women money than we did men. Because men went out to the cities to look for jobs, they went to ranches to work for people, and they're never home. So if you wanted to give money that changes the whatever for the home state, you would better do it for the women. So yes, women are disenfranchised. Do they know how to use money well? Yes, they do. Should we give more of them money? Maybe not. But if they do get the money, we are glad that they actually perform just as good as the men would.
That is really interesting, and also a great example of the role of a Director of Recipient Advocacy, because I have seen these things, mentioned online and in conversations that I've been part of personally, but there's no substitute from hearing from someone who's immersed in it on the front line. I'm conscious of time, and I just wanted to finish with a question actually from one of our staff, who said, what is the most powerful story that you've ever heard from a recipient of a GiveDirectly transfer?
I have had so many stories. That's a really interesting question. I've had so many stories. They have different levels of power depending on when I hear them. But I think listening to stories that impact the lives of people who are most disenfranchised. So for example, this story about the woman I've just talked about who was bedridden, depended on, her children to do for her everything and could not raise any livelihood for herself and her household, for me was really moving. A story of a woman who has been struck with infertility for years, lost one marriage, and was able to save her second marriage just because she received the transfer and got, my life, you have saved my marriage, you have made me human again. That for me was just mind-blowing.
That's amazing. And I think what a great place to finish. If you are not moved by that then please do consider other recommended charities of ours. But certainly, I think there's no better testimony for why we would love you to support GiveDirectly and the fantastic work that they do. And we're going to give you the opportunity to do that directly. So this is the last in our speaker series, but we are going to be hosting some giving lunches where we will donate on your behalf $10 to a charity of your choice at the end of the giving lunch. If you have a conversation with us and tell us what you think about giving, what motivates your giving right now, and also we'll tell you how we see that, and we're obviously hoping to influence you and to give all of these $10 to GiveDirectly and Evidence Action and these other wonderful charities, but we will honestly donate it to even to the Stanford Endowment, which is truly the worst counterfactual donation anywhere in the world, if that's what you would like us to do. So do look out for that. You'll be getting an invitation to that shortly. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. It has just been fascinating, and I know that you are incredibly busy right now with GiveDirectly's work, so we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Jack, and thanks all for coming and listening to us.
Excellent. Guys, thank you very much. That's the last speaker series. You won't get to see my hair growing steadily longer on a weekly basis anymore this year, but we will be back next year. And please do follow up with us through our website if you would like to know more about One for the World or GiveDirectly, and watch your inboxes for that invitation to our giving lunches. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.